Don't forget to click subscribe if you want more video content. The Manchester strike. There can be no doubt that the judgment to be formed upon a strike among the operatives in a great factory district, if it is to be worth anything, must be based upon a more difficult chain of reasoning than usually goes to the consideration of irregularities in the appointed course of trade. Perfectly free competition regulates all prices, it is said, and, in most callings, regulates with certainty the price of labor. A self-adjusting power is introduced by it into the usual machinery of commerce. So far as regards labor, the working of it is that, as a rule, every man goes where he can get most value for such work as he can best perform. And every man who wants labor will, to the extent his capital allows, vie with his neighbors in attempting to secure to his service the best labor he can meet with of the sort he wants. That is the ordinary course of trade. Only the true price stands, and that price being the lowest by which men of average capabilities find that they can live. A poor trade entails secret hardships. Middling trade a bare subsistence, and none but a very brisk trade affords chance of wealth. So it is with the price of skilled labor, but with the price of unskilled labor, it is scarcely so. In each class of men possessing special capabilities there is a given number only, and the aim of each of their employers is to do what he can towards securing for himself, out of that number, the best. For the absolutely unskilled, there can be no competition when a mass of the population, ignorant and in sore need, is pressing forward to receive a dole of such work as it can perform. Or, if there be a competition, it is of an inverse kind, a struggle among thousands for the food of hundreds, each striving by the most desperate offer of cheap labor, sometimes even an hour's work for a farthing, to secure a portion of the necessary subsistence. Skilled labor is, with but few exceptions, subject to an inevitable law, with which employer and employed alike must be content to bring their operations into harmony. But with unskilled labor, the compulsion set on the employer is in no proportion to that set on the employed. Wages in that case are not regulated by a just regard to the fair relations between capital and labor. The question among competitors being not who shall, by paying most, attract the most efficient class of servants, and secure the heartiest assistance, but who shall, by paying least, take most advantage of the necessity of people who are struggling for the chance of only a few crumbs of the bread of independence. It thus becomes notorious enough how it is that cheap articles are produced out of the lifeblood of our fellow creatures. The evil can only be corrected now by the direct interference of our consciences. Unwholesomely cheap production is a perversion of the common law of trade which will, in course of time, be blotted out by the advance of education, and there can never be in this country a glut of intelligence and skill, although we may soon have a glut of ignorance. Parallel with the advance of mind, there will run the advance of mind work, and the diffusion of a right sense of its value will be increased. Thus it will be seen that while we believe with all our hearts in the wholesomeness of the great principle of free competition, regard nothing as so really helpful to the laborer, so sure to beget healthy trade and bring out all the powers of the men engaged in it, we do see that there is in society one class, and that a large one, upon which when men look they may believe that competition is an evil. The truth is that the existence of that class, so helpless and so much neglected, is the evil to remove. But while it remains, as wholesome meat may kill a man with a disease upon him, there is an unsound body hurt by it, requiring, O political economist, spoon meat and medicine, not the substantial bread and beef which doubtless theory can prove and experience affirm to be the best of nourishment for human bodies. There are fevers among bodies politic as among bodies corporal, and we are disposed to think that half the difficulties opposed to a distinct and general perception of the truths which our economists have ascertained depend upon the fact that they have not yet advanced, so to speak, from a just theory of nutrition to the formation of a true system of therapeutics. That which will maintain health is not necessarily that which will restore it. Often it happens that a blister or a purge, though it would certainly make sound men sick, will make the sick man whole. May it not also be that what is ruinous to all sound trade shall hereafter come to be known as a social medicine possessed in certain cases of a healing power, and applicable therefore to some states of disordered system? We believe that a great many discrepancies of opinion may be reconciled by a view like this. Its justice is hardly to be questioned, although as to the particular applications of it there is room for any amount of discussion. Thus, in the case of the Manchester strike, the workmen, though not of the unskilled class, may state that they are unable to feel the working of the principle of competition, that if they do not get what pay they like at one factory, they are not practically at liberty to get the value of their labor in another. Even the population of one mill thrown out of work is too large and too special, as to the nature of the various kinds of skill possessed among its people, to be able to find anything like prompt absorption into other factories. But as masters almost always act in groups for the determination of wages, it is the population not of one mill but that of 5 or 6 that becomes discontented. And the best proof of the fact that it is practically unable to better itself even though higher wages may be given elsewhere is that it does not better itself. There is a curious and decided variation in the rates of wages paid in various factories and manufacturing towns, variations artificially increased by strikes, but the existence of which shows at any rate to the satisfaction of the operatives that rates may be arbitrary and that the natural law does not work easily in their case, which brings the price of any article to its just uniform level. The Manchester masters point out to their men other masters who pay less than they pay. The operatives point, on the other hand, to masters paying more, but it is not in their power to carry their own labor to those masters, as it ought to be for a free working of the principle of competition. Mechanical and accidental difficulties stand completely in the way, and they are aggravated on both sides by habits of imperfect combination. It is just to state these difficulties and to show that the instinct of the operative may not be altogether reprehensible when it suggests to him that against the worst uneasiness which he feels in the system to which he belongs, a blister or a bloodletting in the shape of a strike is the best remedy. He may be very wrong. As a man is apt to be, there is an excuse for his quackery in the fact that he has at present no physician to call in. The difficulties of the case, as it is felt by employers and employed in our manufacturing districts, is aggravated, as we have said, by imperfect combinations. For between the trades unions and the masters' associations there is, in truth, a perfect unity of interest. They who reduce the master's capital reduce his power of employing labor. They who wrong the laborer by whom they live reduce his will and power to do work. At present, men and masters are in many cases combatants because they never have been properly allies. They have not been content to feel that they are fellow workers, that the man at the helm and the man at the oars are both in the same boat, and that the better they agree together, the more likely they will be to weather out a storm. In the case of the existing strike at Manchester, we have read carefully the manifestos, replies, and counter-replies that have been passing between the opposed bodies for the purpose of being laid before the public, and the fact made in them of all others most manifest is that the points raised in them are points that ought to have been raised very many months ago, discussed and understood between the masters and the men before the strike and for the prevention of the strike. Upon the precise points in dispute we cannot undertake to give a definite opinion. From each party to the quarrel we get half a case, and the halves are not such as the public easily will know how to unite into a distinct whole. Rates of wages, as we have already said, do not appear to be uniform, and while the masters in Manchester desire, as we think most fairly and properly, to bring a certain class of wages, raised unduly by strikes, to its just and natural rate, pointing to some other place in which the rate is low, the men point to a place where the rates are higher than at Manchester, and say, "Come, let us strike an average between the two." The offer is refused. It may be necessarily and wisely refused. There are evidently many accessory considerations that affect the nominal day's wages in this place and that. To the public out of Lancashire it cannot be explained fully by manifestos. Between masters and men, if they were in any habit of maintaining a right mutual understanding, it ought not to be possible that any controversy about them could be pushed to the extremity of open breach. The spinners on strike had one of their documents with the last words of Justice Talfourd. If I were asked what is the greatest want in English society to mingle class with class, I would say in one word, the want of sympathy. Most true. But need we say that there is sympathy due from workman towards employer, as well as from employer towards workman? It is essential to a correction of the evil thus stated that the operative should either generously be the first to give up hostile prejudices, or that at the least he should be altogether prompt to second heart and soul every attempt of the master to establish a relation of goodwill and confidence with him. Men rarely quarrel except through what is wisely called misunderstanding. There is some reason that we will not undertake to give, which causes Lancashire, although by no means the only British factory district, to be the district most afflicted by misunderstandings. Nowhere else are the masters so much obstructed by the dictatorial spirit of the men. Nowhere else is the law so much interfered with by the dictatorial spirit of the masters. In Scotland, Yorkshire, and the west of England, masters and men work generally well together, and the law is more or less obeyed. Machinery, for instance, not being, as a rule, obstinately left unfenced. Many pages of this journal have been devoted already to the discouragement of strikes. We have urged invariably that the one perfect remedy against them is the opening up of more and better opportunities of understanding one another between man and master. In case we may be supposed to be ignorant of the feelings about which we reason, let it be known that every thought, almost every word upon this subject given in the paragraphs that follow will be the thought or word, not of a speculative person at a distance, but of a Lancashire milliner. At the time of the disastrous Preston strike, a Preston manufacturer, whose men stood by him honestly and well, published at Manchester a little pamphlet, which, if its counsel had been taken, would assuredly have made the present strike of Manchester impossible. Mr. Justice Talfourd's last words, placed lately by the men above their manifesto, was then chosen as a motto by the masters. Coming, this gentleman wrote into Lancashire from a district where good feelings subsisted between the employer and the employed. It was with the utmost surprise that he found labour and capital to be in a state of antagonism throughout the country. From the time when he first began to employ labour in Lancashire more than a quarter of a century ago, he has made it his strict business to study the system at work around him and discover the real causes of the evils that undoubtedly exist. And he has no hesitation in saying that the main cause is a want of cordial feeling, the absence, in fact, of a good understanding between the parties to the labour contract. This feeling must be established, he adds, or the case never will be mended. Such understanding does not come by any explanations from third parties. It is produced only by direct and habitual intercourse between the parties too often at issue. The Preston manufacturer says that no doubt the masters in Lancashire help their men to be intelligent by spending money liberally upon schools connected directly or indirectly with their mills. Duty is done amply, and for duty's sake too, to children. But he adds, what is really wanted is the education of the adult intellect, the minds of children having been prepared by the rudiments of knowledge to receive ideas, whether good or evil. They are then cast adrift together and continue their education by absorbing all the notions, all the prejudices, and all the fallacies with which chance may surround them. A dispute arises. There is no sympathy shown to the operatives by the employers, but much real or pretended sympathy is shown by the delegates, who tell them fine-spun theories about the results of trades unions. Talk to them in an inflated manner about their rights and wrongs. Tell them that a strike is the only way of battling for the right. Such men never interfere without widening the breach on which they get a footing. Strikes prevented by a Preston manufacturer. Galt and Company, 1854. So far, the Preston manufacturer says what we have felt and said on numerous occasions. Now, let us see how he not only speaks but acts, and how the doing looks, which illustrates the saying. In the first place, minor acts of friendship to the men may be mentioned. He has encouraged them to form a provident club in connection with his mill, and given them all help in it that would not compromise their independence. At the same time, he has encouraged them also to support the benefit clubs out of doors. He has liked them to be led to accumulate savings, never believing that a store of money in the operative's power would facilitate a strike, but rather knowing that the provident man who has saved property will be especially unwilling to see it dissipated. He has provided his men with a reading room and a lending library and secured a fund for its support, while he has removed a cause of soreness that exists in even well-regulated mills, by devoting to their library the fines levied upon operatives for faults of discipline. Such fines are necessary, and the faults for which they are imposed cost, of course, loss to the mill owner, for which they are no real compensation. Nevertheless, if the master puts such shillings into his own pocket, or as is sometimes the case, gives them as pocket money to his son, experience declares that they are grudged, and sometimes counted as extortions. Let the fine go to the common account of the men, and the payer of it, instead of being pitied as the victim of a tyrant, will be laughed at, thanked for his donation to the library, and so forth. Practically also, the result of this system, as the Preston manufacturer has found, is to reduce the number of the fines. Men would so much rather be victims than butts, that acts of neglect are more determinedly avoided. Though we may suggest the general good feeling in the mill as a much better reason for the greater care over the work. Left to select by a committee chosen from among themselves the books to be placed in their library, the men have been found to prefer those which contained useful knowledge, such as manuals of popular science, voyages, and histories. So much being done to promote among the adults increasing intelligence and good feeling, there remains the most essential thing, the cornerstone of the whole system. It has been the practice of this master to promote weekly discussion, meetings among the operatives in his employment. Topics of the day, opinions of the press, the state of trade, questions concerning competition, discoveries on practical science or mechanics, especially such as affect the cotton trade, and lastly, the conduct and discipline of their own mill, provide plenty of matter for the free play of opinion. The master takes every possible opportunity of being present at these meetings, and from what he has heard in them concerning his own mill, the Preston manufacturer declares that he has derived substantial advantage. It will very often, he says, happen that the men may fancy themselves to be suffering under a grievance which does not really exist, and which a very little explanation will at once remove. Sometimes, too, a real grievance may be in existence, which the employer needs only to be informed of to remedy. In some mills, this master adds, such is the fear of the consequence of being thought a grumbler, that the men will often draw lots to determine who shall be the bearer of a complaint which may have been long seeking expression. With one extract we will sum up the result of the adoption of this system. I confess, says the Preston manufacturer, that at the time, having control of a large establishment, I cultivated a habit of meeting and discussing questions with my workmen, both questions affecting the public concernment and questions relating to our business. I confess that I derived quite as much benefit from these discussions as they did, and how much that was may be inferred from the fact that after the institution of that habit I never had a dispute with my operatives. And I will here say that, at those meetings, I have heard an amount of sound and various information expressed with a native strength and eloquence such as would have surprised anyone not conversant with the Lancashire population. It was from those meetings that I derived the settled conviction which I now entertain, that the operatives do not lack the power, but only the means of forming sound and independent opinions. We believe that we employ ourselves more usefully at this juncture in setting forth general principles like these than in any attempt, by arbitration as third parties in a special case, to introduce that which the Preston manufacturer declares to be only a fresh element of discord. Don't forget to click subscribe if you want more video content.